Okay, welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to have three of my heroes with me here on the stage, and to provide us with insights into the situation in Afghanistan, the history of how we got to where we are in Afghanistan, if we want to talk about that, and also what the prospects are, for the future of a country that all of us care deeply about. I know many of you here in the audience too, and the audience that's joining us remotely have connections to through family and friends, or of those certainly in the United States who have served there. And I know that all of us were heartbroken with the outcome of the war that went from 2001 until August of 2021. And we have three people here to help us understand, those kind of three aspects of the experience in Afghanistan, of how we got to where we are today, and their personal experiences as well, and what the prospects are for the future. And so, what I'll go from my left, or from your left to right, I guess. Mr. Parwiz Kawa is a founding member and the editor-in-chief of Hasht Subh Daily, the leading and largest independent newspaper in Afghanistan, and a winner of the International Press Freedom Prize from Reporters Without Borders in 2012. He's worked courageously in local and national media outlets since 1998. I think the last time we saw each other was probably 2012 in Afghanistan, right, in Kabul. He also serves as chairman of the board of directors at the Afghanistan New General Organization, and advisor and member of the board of directors of Afghanistan Journalist Center, and a founding member and the chairman of Afghanistan Analysis and Awareness, A3. This is a civil movement organization and think tank. Mr. Kawa holds a bachelor's in law and political science from Kabul University, and a bachelor's in education from the Baghlan Teacher Training Center. He is also a poet and a novelist, and has published two collections of his poetry, A Night from Exile and Two Guns, Two Stones. Dr. Halima Kazem, she's a star here at the Hoover Institution and at Stanford. She's the associate director of Stanford University's program in feminist, gender, and sexuality studies. She previously served as an oral historian and project manager for Stanford University's and Hoover's Afghanistan Research and Relief Team, the HART team. She holds a PhD in feminist studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a master's in business and economic journalism from New York University. She spent 17 years as a journalist and filmmaker, including a decade reporting on Afghanistan's war and rebuilding efforts. Kazem worked as a human rights researcher for Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and as a journalism instructor for the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. She is co-producer of Frontrunner, a documentary chronicling the campaign of the first female presidential candidate in Afghanistan. Halima's forthcoming book, A Feminist History of Afghanistan, subtitle is Resisting the Erasure of Women, unearths and narrates the little-told feminist history of women's movements in Afghanistan. And next, on the far right of the stage, is my old friend, Nader Nadery. He's a senior fellow at the Wilson Center, was, I guess I should say, sadly, at the Wilson Center, and a visiting fellow here at the Hoover Institution. In 2020, he was appointed as a member of Afghanistan's peace negotiation team for the peace talks in Doha. He also served as chairman of the Independent Civil Service Commission of Afghanistan. Prior to joining the commission, he was senior advisor to the Afghan president on strategic affairs and human rights. Nadery has also served as director of the Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit, a unit that I depend heavily on when I was in Afghanistan, commissioner of the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, and director of Afghanistan programs for global rights, Partners for Justice. He is the founder of the Free and Fair Election Foundation of Afghanistan, which observed elections, I guess I should say now, and co-founder of the Afghan Civil Society Forum, a foundation for civil society and culture. In 2002, he served as a spokesperson for the emergency lawyer Jirga, or the Grand Assembly that elected the head of Afghanistan's transitional government. Nadery, prior to that, it's not in your bio here, was imprisoned by the Taliban from 1996 to 2001. He courageously unearthed violations of human rights across Afghanistan's recent history, from the Soviet occupation through the Civil War to the brutal rule of the Taliban the first time, and then onward after the fall of the Taliban in 2001. It's a study which I hope we'll talk more about. It's been suppressed, but I think Hoover can work with you on making that accessible to people. Nadery studied law and political science at Kabul University in Afghanistan and earned his MA in international relations from George Washington University. So it is fantastic to be with all of you. Hey, I think what would be really tremendous for our audience here and for our audience that is dialed in remotely is to hear your stories, and maybe just go right down the line, beginning with Parwiz. Your stories about your personal and your family's experience in this extraordinarily difficult period of time, from the Soviet occupation to the Civil War to the Taliban rule to the fall of the Taliban, and the sustained terrorist and insurgency campaign that Afghans had to endure, and then obviously the heartbreaking fall of the Afghan government and the reestablishment of Taliban rule. I would love to hear from Parwiz. John, your story, and as an activist, a poet, a journalist, and for Halima, really that your experience as a journalist, and then also as an oral historian and somebody's trying to understand the broad experience of the people, and from Nader, obviously you've got insights into everything up to I think the ill-conceived U.S. Taliban negotiations, and you're one of the liaisons to that. So, Parwiz, would you begin, please, your personal story?
Well, thank you so much, Mr. McMaster, and I'm glad to be here with all of you, and with all who are following us through Zoom online. It is a lot of ups and downs, of course, but I'll share those parts that might bring some sort of that could be somehow educational, and that could also help us to remember the parts of the story. Well, when Soviets came, I was a kid, I can say, still at very beginning years of school. And it was fun for us to try to learn some words in Russian, just to be able to communicate with the Soviet soldiers, because they were bringing lots of stuff for sale. They were stealing stuff from their bases and camps and bringing it to the cities, and we were trying to negotiate between them, or maybe mediate between them, selling that and somebody who
Afghans are quite good at that.
Well, I speak 4 languages, the language that are spoken in that region. Well, that was the beginning. Of course, it came with a lot of bombing, a lot of rockets, a lot of wars. I witnessed people killed in front of me, including my teachers. I remember many sad stories of those eras, including one blast that happened right behind our home, and that broke all windows. And my mother was trying to save us, and put a ladder, and we help us to cross the wall and go to our neighbor's
and this is
house.
Badakhshan, I believe, right?
No, it was in Kapisal province. Well, on that time we were living in Jabal Sarai district, which was part of Parwan province, to the north of Afghanistan. But one of the largest bases of Soviet soldiers were there in Parwan, including the Bagram Air Base on those days. So yeah, then we were actually one day informed that Soviets were leaving the country, and we were still in school. So they were trying to take us to the roadside, just to line up and say goodbye to Russian tanks. So that was something we were forced to do, because we were studying in the schools where the ideology was running the whole educational system. We went there on the road, and luckily, by the time we were there, the soldiers or the Soviet troops had already left. So they said, okay, so we need to walk back to the school. Then we had these Mujahideen coming to power, and during that time, of course, I was getting ready to get into the high school, and later on, it came to the Taliban, to the civil war, of course, and then to the first era of the Taliban, when for the first time I just had to leave the country and reside in Pakistan for a while. And wait there until counting down the days to return back home. And in 2021, when after 9/11 and after the invasion of, Western troops in Kabul, so we could return back. And since then, of course, with other friends like Nader Nadery was one of the founding fathers of Hasht when we established that. So we were talking and seeing what we can do. So at one point we thought an independent newspaper is missing in this country, because there are a lot of things to say and a lot of missions we have, a lot of responsibilities we have as individuals, and we have to transform that into something to make it beneficial to others too. And on that time, of course, we thought a newspaper is needed, which can enlighten people. It took, of course, some time. In 2007, we established Subh Daily Newspaper through the support of a group of journalists and civil society activists and human rights activists, including Nader Nadery, our friend, and some others. And then it was a new journey for all of us. It was the newspaper came with a lot of responsibilities. We had to fight with corruption. We had to fight with we had to fight for a good governance in Afghanistan. We had to fight for accountability, and of course, we got inspirations from friends. Like when you were in Kabul, of course, you were working for Shafafiyat, which was an anti-corruption unit within ISAF on those days. So we're seeing that whatever we do to investigate and maybe name and shame people who are involved in corruption, somebody reads it, somebody listens to this, and somebody takes action within the government, within the international community, and that helped us. And that made this commitment more stronger in ourselves to continue in this path. And that continued up to 2021. And then collapse happened. Of course, that was a nightmare for all of us. On those days, I was in Turkey, Ankara, trying to plan my trip to Kabul, because normally from this part of the world, when you travel to that part of the world, you have to have a layover somewhere. And when I got the news that Taliban are inside the city, and then we had to focus on evacuating our staff, closing the office, and reestablishing ourselves and transforming ourselves into a news source. Of course, we couldn't continue to print the newspaper because we're not operating in Afghanistan anymore, but we tried to shift it into something else, an online news platform with some other products added to that, like multi-media journalism, citizen journalism, and more of online presence and using of social media platforms just to reach the people, because our website got blocked by the Taliban. So we had to mirror all the contents into a new website and introduce it back to the people. And now we are here. And the long story, of course, it has a lot to learn from. It has a lot to talk about. And I think one of the biggest achievements we had and that's from 2001 to 2021, was this independent media that still we have that. That's the only survival of this situation. We lost our parliament and other, the whole structure of the government. But the only thing that we can say that is still there is this independent media, some of them operating from outside, including Hasht Soap or ATM media.
So Halima, John, you were, obviously a reporter in this period of time as well, especially the latter period. You also were a documentarian, and so could you share from your perspective how you understand that broad sweep of experience, and really, how you interacted with these various phases of Afghanistan's recent history?
Thank you, General McMaster. I was born in Afghanistan, but I was raised here in the United States and went to school and university. But I was able to return after 9/11, and I was actually recruited to establish the first presidential media office for President Karzai under the emergency interim government. That is where I first met Nader John. So we were both a lot younger, 23 years ago, I think it was. And so that was an interesting experience to arrive in a country that had been so disconnected from the world, to make a long distance call or send a fax. We had to drive down to Pakistan to do some of that, to connect to the internet. We had to connect to the satellite phone, to a dial-up onto a laptop, and we're talking 2002 when I arrived, a few months after the Taliban. So setting up a media office in that way wasn't what I was thinking when I was in New York. But that was a challenge for the emergency Loya Jirga. We were using bulletin boards to communicate with the thousands of journalists who had embarked on Kabul for the first gathering, the Loya Jirga, the assembly. So that was a really immediately rude awakening to what the landscape looked like at that time. And then over the years, my biggest privilege was I worked with the government for a couple months and realized as a journalist, that's not my place. But it was my biggest privilege to work with news organizations and build the capacity of the Afghan journalists. I think I trained over 400, 500 journalists over the years. And I think one of the biggest accomplishments was establishing Pajwak Afghan News Agency, which was the first independent news agency in Afghanistan. And we had established bureaus all over the country. That was very exciting. That was 2004, 2005. So I have a slide, and I wanted to show this slide. This is from Reporters Without Borders, RSF, and it's on Press Freedom Index. And I plotted the different years to show you the volatility in press freedom from 2002 to 2024. So the higher the point on the chart, the more free the country was when it came to press freedom. So if we look at the top in 2002, is a clean slate. We're probably at the best point in media freedom because everything was starting out. And then you can see the points dipping in when the Taliban regroups in 2006 and 2007. You see press freedom dropping, and then you see more development in the ANA and security sector, then you see media freedom. So you see the changes, the peaks and valleys, and it follows the political cycle. And at the end, I'll leave this up for a few minutes. At the end, you will see the lowest point to 2025 and how far we dropped from 2021 to 2025. We are now 178 out of 180 countries as far as press freedom. So basically 2 from the bottom. And this just captures a little bit of the volatility that has occurred in the last 20 years. And to me, this chart means a lot because I think when I lay it over political developments, when I lay it over regional developments, and then global trends towards authoritarian regimes and the politics that follow, we can see those changes in press freedom in Afghanistan. And so I can talk a little bit more as we go into the information gap and media gap. But I would want to hear Naderjan's personal story before we do that, because it also ties in with the work that I do with oral histories, and his interview is in the Hoover Afghanistan Oral History Archive. And so, Naderjan. Oh.
No, that's perfect, because what I think we'll do is we'll hear from Nader on his experience and how we got to where we are today. Then what I want to do is have all of you talk about what you're doing now, given the terrible situation in Afghanistan. But Nader.
Well, thank you so much, HR. So wonderful to be with you, and also with Dr. Saib and Kawa Saib and the rest of you. Probably I begin picking from the point when both of you started about the Soviet coming and the environment there. I was something that is inscribed almost in my psyche is that moment when my dad started digging a hole in the yard and burying the books. So I was probably 2 or 3 years old, but that stayed with me throughout my life. The Russian jets were flying over. My mom was very, very much scared and concerned and was helping my dad. My dad was burying his books because he was an elder, a landowner.
An incredibly impressive man who I had the great honor of meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so he was afraid of the knowledge that he had and the wealth of that knowledge through those books that was not related to the Russians. And that was the first spark of how suppression and unilateral way of thinking on the issues could look like, and how it is horrible. And then fast forward in 2001, when the Taliban toppled, and throughout these 2 decades, the books were mostly banned or was so limited. The publishing houses gone, printing presses were gone. The war then destroyed the rest of it. In 2001 and beginning of 2002, as we heard from Kawa and from Dr. Saib, there was a spike in the level of access to information and the books everywhere, number of publishing houses and all of that. And the growth of civil society and free press. To 2021, it was 1,800 print papers across the country in different regions, hundreds of radio stations and tens of televisions across. And the books was one of the pride of the students and everybody else on the street, and the bookstores return. But again, my own books, September 2001, after 2 weeks after the Taliban took over Kabul, I had to do the same thing, but from distance, because my house were subject to being searched. So I had to ask a friend to collect all my notebooks and all the books and put them in big iron boxes and take them to somewhere else so that they could be saved. And especially my notebooks, which are part of the history.
And this is 2021.
2021, after the collapse of the government and the Taliban's return. So through all of this time, we have seen how freedom of expression, access to knowledge have been affected significantly. If I may, between 2001 and 2021, there's one illustration that I have it in my book, and I may read that part of that.
Nader's working on a book, which I've just skimmed through. I saw it for the first time today. It's going to be fantastic, and it's a personal perspective on what's happened. It's elegantly written, but please share part of it. Would you?
Well, thank you. It's part of a chapter called loud envoy and a silent republic. And I begin each chapter with a story, and a story to take it out of just dry historical narrative. It is a historical narrative.
Well, you know, we have another author in the audience, Zachary Short, who writes that way too.
I look forward.
And I envy both of you for your ability to grab a reader. But go ahead, yeah.
I look forward to learn from him. So I start from that paragraph. As we neared Hewa, a district in the north of in the east of the country, I spotted a group of young and old resting farmers in a grain field. They sat on the ground, their faces weathered yet serene, sipping tea during a break from their labor. Tea is an essential thread in the fabric of Afghan life, ubiquitous elixir that soothes and revives, particularly under the blazing summer sun. Heat beats heat, the saying goes, favoring warmth over ice-cold relief. Curious, I asked my colleagues if we could pause our journey. When we walked over, the elder among them, a man in his 70s with a flowing white beard and a neatly wound turban, greeted us warmly and invited us to join them. He handed me a steamed cup of green tea and a small piece of gur, the rich and refined sugar candy made from sugar cane. As we settled, I noticed a small radio on the ground playing a lively talk show from Radio Free Afghanistan, a station out of Prague, founded by the United States in 1950, and its program for Afghanistan began 2001. Unfortunately, that station has also been shut down last month. Prague, that Radio Free Europe, which was funded by US, is now closed by the United States. Callers chimed in with their views. The farmers soon resumed their animated conversation, discussing the upcoming harvest and the careful planning required for water distribution across their fields. Without modern mechanized irrigation system, Afghan farmers and landowners have long relied on traditional community-driven practices. These are overseen by a seasoned elder known as Mirab, chosen by the community for his expertise and moral authority to ensure fair and efficient allocation of this vital resource, a tradition of community governance and local wisdom. I turned to the elder, whose name I soon learned was Hayat Gul Khan, and asked Kaka, what do you think has been the best change in life in this district these last few years compared to the past? From where we sat, I could see newly built government offices and a freshly paved road that had dramatically shortened the travel time to Jalalabad city. I expected he made point these visible improvements first. Instead, his gaze brightened as he gestured toward the modest radio beside him. At first, I didn't grasp his meaning. Sensing my confusion, he elaborated, his tone firm yet tinged with wonder. Of all these changes, the most valuable is freedom to speak openly about powerful people. He described how, not so long ago, one could only whisper criticism of local warlords or district officials, fears of reprisal, stifling any dissent. Now, he said with quiet pride, people and journalists criticize Padshah, the ruler, ministers and governors without fear. He tapped on the radio gently, his smiles widening. This gives us a way to air our frustration about the government and hold them to account. So that's an elder man of 70 in a very remote part of the country. From all development, what he cherished was the freedom of expression, the free press, which unfortunately, as you see in the slide, is no more there the way it was. And that also indicates that how quickly some of the gains we have made, not only in Afghanistan, anywhere else, could be retracted and could slide back. And just a final word, which breaks my heart to share also. Last week, when the Wilson Center, a place for creating knowledge and information, was shut down, and people, staff who worked, and my colleagues who worked for a very long time there, they begin whispering about further retaliation against them, that they may lose certain benefits if they speak up. And that broke my heart, because I never imagined that this could happen, in the United States. That event, that town hall, reminded me of August 11, 2021 in Kabul, when I gathered around 800 of my staff from Civil Service Commission. They were feared, scared, and very nervous about what was coming out. As their colleague and head of the office, it was my responsibility to tell them, to calm them a little bit, but to not keep information from them, but also not to bring panic in them. So I had to bring a level of ease in them and explaining what's coming and what would enable them to continue that fight. That day in Washington, and that whisper and that town hall painfully reminded me of that day. And I said, freedoms that we have anywhere are precious, but they are vulnerable and needed to be protected here or anywhere else.
Great. Hey, what I'd like to do is just do this more conversationally. So, really what I want to do is take us to the present now, right? All of you have played a very important role in making sure that the Afghan people can maintain their voice, have a voice, despite the repression of the Taliban regime. And all of you are doing it in different ways. And I thought maybe you might just talk about your ongoing efforts now, that despite the stifling of human freedom and the stifling of freedom of the press and freedom of speech in Afghanistan, what can be done despite that terrible situation? Parwiz John, you want to start first?
Oh, yeah. Well,
and jump in, everybody.
Well, I think the least we can do is just to keep the story of Afghanistan and Afghans who under the Taliban alive. Just to help them to share their stories and publish their stories as much as we can. There are a lot of human rights violences, and we have the stories from them. One of the stories that actually so jointly worked with New York Times won an Emmy Award. Of course, winning an Emmy Award is quite fascinating and helps us, encourages us to continue. But more important is the stories of those who are stuck behind and who are tortured every day, especially those human rights activists, journalists, former security officials or officers, soldiers, I can say. So what we do as a newspaper, formerly newspaper, where we could print, and now as an online newspaper, is to bring the stories of Afghanistan to the world, to inform what's going on inside Afghanistan, a country that was supported for 20 years by the United States, by international community, and we got a lot of things, positive things there. We built institutions, we experienced elections and democracy, and we had an enormous number of civil society organizations and media institutions, and that was all byproduct of the United States and the Western world. And now, those who work in these sectors in the past are the most vulnerable ones, because they are targeted by the Taliban every day, and they are hiding and traveling from one province to another province just to hide themselves, just to lose the track of themselves. So this is the situation. what we do as a newspaper is to continue reporting from inside the country. That's why we have a network of committed and determined journalists inside the country, including female reporters who are bringing those reports to us. And we have a group of editors who are mainly outside the country, and they process those materials and turn it into a newspaper stories. And we publish that. I think that this is.
Can you tell our audience just basically how do you access the website, the 8 a.m. website, and how do they get to it?
In the past, we had this a very short domain name, which was easy to remember for everyone, and still it's not that difficult. It was 8am.af. We were operating based on Afghanistan domain, which is .af. But so once the Taliban came in, they halted the website. So they banned access of people to our website. So that website is not accessible anymore, even for us. Then, but we had this in mind that one day they might come after the website because this .af domain is under their control. So we were mirroring the contents of the newspaper into a new website like 8am.media. So we registered this .media domain just to be prepared, and we did did it right. After nearly 1 year, the Taliban came and closed our website. But we could just inform the people that, okay, website is closed, but this is the platform that you can still continue accessing 8am media, including the whole archive and the whole history. History of the contents we had. So we didn't lose anything, but we had to inform people to come and to just shift from 8am.af to 8am.media. Plus, we, of course, this website, 8am.media, is still banned in some parts of the country. Some telecommunication companies are trying to filter us. And that's why we try to use social media, because those are giant companies. By the time the Taliban decide to ban Facebook, that would be a new war. Not with us as journalists, but with Meta, a big company in the United States. So we thought that would be difficult for them to go to that war. That's why we established, we invested more on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, Telegram, whatever platform is there. We just wanted to be present and help people to access our information through those platforms. So this is the situation now. We have a group of committed journalists inside Afghanistan, and we have a group of platforms, I can say, that we process those information and give it back to the people. Plus, we have the people themselves helping us. We have this citizen journalism a scheme where we train people, or we advise them how to film something or how to report something that happens in their communities. They send it to us. We do our own fact checking and processing parts, and we republish that. We tell the story. If for instance, a story happens in Kabul, we just want to make sure someone in Mazar Sharif or Herat knows what happened in Kabul. And that comes through the citizens themselves. That's one of the stories.
Well, I think it's just brilliant, because what you're doing is you're getting information out so that we can really continue to give the Afghan people a voice and understand their experience, but you're also getting information back in, like around the firewalls, and informing people. And I think it's just fantastic work, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Halima, do you want to talk about maybe the oral history project, or really whatever you want to talk about?
Actually,
what you're doing today.
maybe I start with a little bit of context to explain why Ashta Sobh 8 a.m. is the diaspora media is so important. So as we talked earlier, Afghanistan ranks 178 out of 180 in RSF's Press Freedom Index. Since 2021, 40% of media outlets have been shut down, and over 80% of women journalists lost their jobs. The Taliban have taken specific measures to dismantle Afghanistan's once vibrant independent media sector, of which Hasht was a very big part of. Just to walk through quickly some of the things that they've done to tighten to basically dismantle the media landscape is September 2021, almost right away, a month after, they issued media content restrictions. So immediately banning entertainment programs, prohibiting content deemed contrary to Islamic values or critical of the regime, which becomes very subjective here. They also banned foreign media and entertainment, a lot of foreign films like Turkish films and Indian films. So again, slowly narrowing down. And then what was a very big move was in September 2021, a code of conduct for journalists, prohibiting the broadcast of material that contradicts Islamic values, barring reporting that could be perceived as insulting national figures, Taliban leaders, or harming national unity. So just walking through some of these to just paint the picture for you. Arbitrary arrests and intimidation of journalists, going into newsrooms and threatening closure or raids of newsrooms, bans on female journalists and broadcasters, closure of media outlets, hundreds of media outlets were closed. And then something that's very important right now is the use of the Taliban, the use of social media by the Taliban for their propaganda. So that's why diaspora media on social media online is so important, because it counters that narrative, that propaganda that the Taliban are using. My assessment from working in media space is that they will never shut down the internet. That is their means of recruitment, of outreach and propaganda. So there becomes this dire need for diaspora media to counter these narratives. The Taliban use X, Telegram, WhatsApp to spread propaganda and monitor dissent. They use tactics like online harassment, doxing, which is using personal information of people, especially women, to silence them, especially journalists, arresting people over their posts, and in co-opting and silencing influencers. So really, just to point this out, is that since 2021, the Taliban media strategy has been shifting from insurgent media activity, which is the environment we were all working in under the Republic, because the Taliban still had a social media presence, but they were insurgent media activity. There weren't this organized media strategy. But now that has turned into their shifting from insurgent media activity to a government-controlled media landscape. And so we can see that they're even broadcasting in the previous slide in Arabic for RTA, for radio television Afghanistan, which was not the case. They were broadcasting just in the national languages. These are appealing to insurgents who are Arabic-speaking insurgents who are in country from different places. So looking at those as indicators of who their audience is, thinking about that. And I'll wait on.
There's a recent UN report. I think it was something like 22 separate terrorist training bases now within Afghanistan.
Yep.
And I think almost like one in every province. So yeah, I mean, and obviously that's the audience probably for this Arabic
Yes.
Taliban media platform. Thank you.
On what's happening currently, to add to what Dr. Halima and Parwiz said, a massive amount of human rights violation, apart from what is well documented, because it's measurable easily to a baseline of the freedom of media, especially, but massively, along with the violations of women's rights, which I and many other people in the human rights community and lawyers now describe it as a gender apartheid, and that means all the three key elements of an apartheid regime is applied to the maximum level on Afghan women. But apart from that, there's a large list of other human rights violations that are systematically being imposed and carried out by the regime. So there are torture in a large scale happening in a lot of detention facilities run by the Taliban. There is a significant number of people arbitrarily arrested, put in detention facility without right to due process. There are no courts for them to be presented to. That includes human rights activists, civil society activists, and political actors too. On the political right to political activities, which was a fundamental right under the previous constitution, the Taliban have abolished the entire registry of political parties law and political party registry with the Ministry of Justice, and announced completely illegal any activities of political nature. So political parties are also being banned. On top of all of that, economic and cultural rights are massively and systematically being undermined and violated. The citizens are not allowed to practice or to enjoy cultural engagements. For example, there are no music anymore allowed. Music is completely banned. Exhibitions of art that depicts human face or any
women's
living,
voices.
that women
mean,
voices,
right.
art of any nature, all of that is being banned. So, and then education as part of a fundamental cultural right that is enshrined in the UN Convention on Social and Cultural Rights is also completely violated. On top of that, the Emir, the Taliban Emir at the Eid sermon said, God have created poor and rich. So those of you who are poor must accept that position, because that is the will of the God and you can't do anything about it. And that is because the poverty is increasing day by day, and a large number of population were and are dependent on international aid. And as the international aid goes down, so poverty increases and people's demand for food is more. And therefore, to calm them down, he says, you need to accept what God has made you. And there's nowhere in Quran that would say that. It's the opposite. To say you have to step up, you have to take your destiny in your hand. And once you moved, God would replicate your efforts. Reward to your efforts. So it's
Right.
it's
But if you want passivity,
absolutely,
that's how you interpret. Yeah.
but then something that makes me optimistic is not like that there some of the fightings that are happening here and there, military resistance, but more of the social resistance. Knowing that what Afghan women have been doing in the past 3.5 years, so courageously being on the street time and again, and finding other creative methods to fight back. But along with that, an increasing number of young Afghans who are creating different methods of resistance and building for a future that they could, their resistance may take 5 years, 10 years, but the decision that they're committed to go through a longer term process to build up a bottom-up pressure, where that bottom-up pressure creates a massive number of individuals connected through a created social capital that they could challenge the Taliban's repressive authority. Within that, especially, when I talk to a lot of them, they are aware of this changing in the global discourse around the international norms. and the lack of visibility on human rights issues, on freedom of expression, on democratic values in major power competition that's happening globally. These dialogues are missing, and they're noticing it. Some of them are disappointed with that. And events like this gives them a point of reference that it's not entirely omitted from international foreign policy discourses and international thinking there. But one additional element is documentation of the past human rights, the current human rights abuses. And the current human rights abuses documentation is so fundamental, because when we did last time, the 23 years of documentation of human rights abuses took us 3 years, and a lot of work have gone to it. The report that you have referred to, HR, but a lot of firsthand eyewitnesses did not exist anymore. And collecting and building a credible historical record of what has happened, but also human rights violation record what has happened, would require a lot of rigorous work. And these documentation and organizations of civil society that are currently doing those human rights documentation is building the right kind of foundation for future possible accountability and justice to the Taliban and their other foreign fighters and terrorist groups that are operating there with them together.
Okay, so sadly, we're getting close on time, and I do want to take some questions from the audience. So here's what we're going to do. I want to ask actually each of you just to talk quickly about what more you're doing. Nader, you may have already talked about this, to kind of restore agency to the Afghan people. And while they're summarizing what they're doing and what some of their initiatives are today, think about what questions you have. And if it's okay with you, we'll take 3 questions in succession. They've got to be short and really be questions. And then we'll ask you to address whatever or all of the questions that come your way. All right. So Halima, jump in, and then Parwiz, you go.
Sure.
You go next. Yeah, what you're doing to restore agency,
Okay.
or whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you, General McMaster. So this, what we're doing right now at Hoover, and really because of the work that General McMaster and Chelsea put in place before I even got here, was the Hoover Afghanistan Research and Relief Team Oral History Archive. The reason why I stopped teaching to come to do the archive was because this kind of archive was what I wanted growing up in the United States of my parents' generation, in order to dig into that archive and be able to write and research. And it didn't exist. And for General McMaster to have the foresight to, as a historian and as someone who had served in Afghanistan, to be able to come up with this project was amazing for me. And I thank you for that, because that's the work that allowed me to do the work on the Hoover Afghanistan Oral History Archive. And basically for the last 2.5 years, I've been flying everywhere, interviewing, doing oral history interviews, shortest one 90 minutes, longest one 10.5 hours, over 4 parts, over Zoom, in person, and documenting. We have almost 500 hours of recordings. Most of them 90% with video to capture the emotion and the expressions. It's an archive of affect, I call it, because it's an archive of emotion. And as we heard with the 2 stories here, and even my own, it's an archive of emotions, of uncertainty, of displacement, of resilience, of a lot of things of the human condition. And so we have government officials, military generals, fighter pilots, parliamentarians, activists, journalists, educators, students, diplomats, business owners. We have about 10–15% of the archive are Americans, and they're US generals, just like General McMaster. We still have to do your interview for the archive. Aid workers, researchers, security personnel, diplomats, all telling the various parts of a larger narrative. We also did, knowing that the conditions inside Afghanistan to capture were very important, we did a subset of 40 interviews inside Afghanistan, which captures certain moments and tells the story. So I traveled to Turkey, Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, London, all over the US to record these interviews. And I think that when the archive is launched this summer, it's going to be a very rich place for people to come and not just study the politics, but study all of the different aspects of Afghans' lives, and especially the period of the Republic. And so what is the benefit of having oral histories? It's knowledge production. So it's something we've been talking about here. It's countering official histories. Oral histories allow individuals to be inserted into histories where oftentimes it's been a documentation that has been physical documentation. So it creates space for individuals like our friends here to be part of historical memory, and it creates and transmits meaning from memory, which is very important here. It evokes new ways of hearing and imagines the future on understandings of the past. And that's what the archive will do. But at the same time, that's what human rights documentation does. And that's what diaspora media do in this context. So that's something that I'm working on right now.
Great. Thank you so much. Parwiz John.
Well, I think what we need to do and what we are currently doing is to avoid Afghanistan becoming a black hole of information.
Mm-hmm.
So information is there. There are a lot of things happening, and we need to report on that. And when it comes to commitment, of course, we know that when you have Afghans, they can report on Afghans and Afghanistan the best. That's why we have to keep training the new generation of reporters. Mr. Karimi is here, who's been involved in supporting the independent media and especially the studies and trainings of that. Maria Jen is here, so she has been always supporting the female reporting, female journalism in Afghanistan, and still she's quite supportive of the whole process of keeping the Afghan female reporters working in this sector. Of course, when you work in a regular newsroom in Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, and under the control of the Taliban, you cannot do much. But when you work in a secret way, it's like, hit and run. So you grab a story and run and reach your safety and report it and file it to your newsroom somewhere else. In our case, in exile. That's, the stories that we have to bring from Afghanistan, and we have to tell it to people. So that, this contributes to the mission of, our major mission to avoid Afghanistan becoming a black hole of information.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, Nader, I think we're just going to go right to questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
But as we transition to questions, how about just like one round of applause now for these three courageous, fantastic people. And then thank you so much for these really moving, informative insights into your own experience, what you're doing now, and efforts to restore agency to the Afghan people. So what I'd like to do is open it up for questions. If you just raise your hand, we can bring a microphone to you. Yes, gentleman here. And we can take three in a row if we want to do that, because we're going to be compressed. So there's got to be more questions to that. So come up with them. Grace, somebody has got to go with a question. Okay. All right, go ahead.
So I also call myself like a civil servant in Afghanistan. I used to work at a lot of organizations, and we used to have a lot of events. So given the severe restrictions on media and social society under Taliban rule, what are the most effective ways for those of us outside Afghanistan to support Afghan journalists, historians, volunteers, and activists, I would say, in preserving the truth and amplifying their voices without putting them at further risk? This, I think, goes for everyone in the panel, because I used to work for TEDx Kabul, and we had a lot of events to organize, but we couldn't after the Taliban took over. And same thing with Code Weekend. I was the founding member of Code Weekend. And after Taliban took over, we couldn't do any events. So that's my question for everyone.
Great question. Thank you so much. We'll go to Grace, and then we'll go to this. We'll take 4. How about that? We'll go, and so we'll know where the microphones are going next. Okay, great. Go ahead, Grace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing about the amazing work that y'all are doing. I'm Grace. I'm a freshman here. My question is, what do you think is the biggest misconception about Afghanistan? What is it that we don't see in the mainstream media? What is it that we get wrong, especially like me and other college students, people my age? What do we not know that's really, really important and critical that we should know? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Grace, who's an oral historian in her own right, and has helped with curating a lot of our oral histories. We'll go to the gentleman here on the right, and then to the lady in the back.
Thank you for being here today. From my experience when I was in Afghanistan is that electronic media, radio and TV played an outsized role in getting information to the remote villages. And obviously that's changed dramatically. So I'm kind of curious, similar to the comments here, but what can the diaspora community do to really ensure that some semblance of information is still getting through using the formats to deal with the illiteracy in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question is primarily directed at Dr. Halima. Since you mentioned how the internet has, particularly X, Telegram, WhatsApp has become a source of propaganda and recruitment, and how even the fact that messages are being transmitted in Arabic kind of signals a shift in the audience. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this shift, and particularly whether or not a lot of this messaging is internally focused, i.e. towards Afghanis, or if there's some signaling happening to, both the other states in the region, or even, the international community as a whole.
Okay, great questions. All right, so just quickly to help you out here, because I'm over 60, man. I know I took notes. So the first is, what can we do to support those greatest Afghans within Afghanistan without them incurring further risk? What is the greatest misconception about Afghanistan? Radio and TV. What can the diaspora, others of us, do to get around the firewall to reach the audiences inside? And then social media and the shift in messaging. What does this portend, and what's your analysis of it? Okay, so take all of them. Some of them, just jump in and
yeah, 2 of them probably. On the question of misconceptions, there's a lot of misconceptions about Afghans, but I would point to about Afghanistan on 2 of them. One, that there's a lot of people, when they talk about human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan, they say, well, these are Western ideas that came from West to there, and it doesn't have roots in majority of Afghan rural communities. And these are few in Kabul who knew about it, and they were advocating for it, and the rest of the country didn't know. And this is a very clear misconception. In 2004, I have run a nationwide survey and a study of concepts of human rights and how people understand the very notion of human rights there. They didn't know about the conventions, they didn't know about the International Declaration of Human Rights, but they knew what respecting human dignity was. Access to education and the right to go to school was so fundamentally and clearly known to them. In Afghanistan, in 1960s, there were women sitting in the cabinet. And the first queen, in 1920s, Dr. Saib can speak more as the theme of her book, Afghan female were going abroad for studies. So the misconception that what the Taliban are trying to impose on Afghans or establish as rule is what Afghan society wants is an absolute misconception. There's no reality in Afghan society. The second one, of course, the story I told or read from the book of Hayat Gul Khan. He didn't know, it's 70s, he didn't know of the Article 19 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But like any human being anywhere else, Afghans also love anything that's beautiful, anything that is good for human being. And Ayat Gul Khan was very clear example of that sets of values and thinking. He didn't know of Article 19, but he knew freedom of press was so fundamental to him feeling good about holding governments accountable. A second misconception is that Afghan society is so traditional, it doesn't have, it was never ruled by a government, and it doesn't know democracy. And all of those three are completely wrong. Governments were there, central governments and functioning governments for centuries. The government bureaucracies were from the time when Afghanistan had an empire and was having under control number of countries around it. Democracy, in a traditional sense, this practice of jirgas, community organization form of governance, where everybody sits around in a circle. In the south, it's called jirga. In the north of the country, it's called Qawm Kucha, the tribe of the street. And whatever political or social decision they want to make it collectively together. And one of the most successful democratic elections out of fraud that happened in the past 20 years was the 2002 emergency law election, which combined both the traditional practice and the modern voting in 2 phases. So that's also a very clear misconception. It's rooted in that society. It just needed to be looked at in an Afghan way, not purely and defined some sort of Orientalist look to them.
Coming to that that concern, which is a general concern for all of us, how to protect the human rights defenders and journalists inside the country. So in last 3 years or more than 2 years, we have seen that whenever a human rights defender or activist or a women's rights activist is arrested, or a journalist is put in prison, and we talk more about that, that somehow safeguards them, because we know that Taliban are still afraid of the free media, those who are operating from outside, because they know that these reports published by media in diaspora might reflect or might shape the human rights reports either by the United Nations or country reports by different countries. And that's why they're trying to avoid or maybe release the person who's in prison. This is the thing what we can do as reporters, to tell their story, to keep reporting from inside the country, especially those who are tortured or arrested by the Taliban. And I think this is the major responsibility of us as media in exile, I can call it. We have, of course, some TVs, radios operating inside the country. They bring a lot of stories to the people, but those critical stories that needs to be discussed and needs to be brought to the people, that's missing. Human rights violation, gender apartheid, or the situation of women inside the country. I mean, democracy or values, freedom of speech. You cannot question where the leader of the Taliban is. You're not allowed to question any of the Taliban leaders. So these are the things that we want to talk about that. And I think this is, I mean, we need to keep the balance between those media outlets operating inside the country and those who are outside. There are things they can say and there are things we can say. And we might be somehow supporting supporting each other. But I mean, the vital, the presence of the media in exile is vital, I can say, because this is how we keep people outside Afghanistan informed about the situation of human rights violations, massive human rights violations that's happening in the country now.
Thank you so
Can I
much.
quickly add to something, like making a campaign for Hasht and other media here? The Afghan diaspora community could do one fundamental help to bring or keep alive the voice, and that is do take subscription for media outlets like Hasht or others, and if they are freely available, make donations, whatever, because they're struggling these days with the international development aid being cut off, and the media in diaspora who were dependent partially to the international aid is struggling. So if a large community of Afghan diaspora in US and in Europe and other places, each of them either make small donation annually or get subscription, it will keep them going. And that is, it's not harming anything, but it's giving voice to Afghans inside, but also getting, as HR said before, the information out of Afghanistan. So just
Great.
Right, and the defunding of the National Endowment for Democracy, for USIP, all of those organizations fund. I don't know. I think so. Do you get NED funding?
We do.
Yeah, and so by cutting that off, we're cutting off information pathways for a lot of Afghans to get.
And just a quick comment, and then really, Halima, I want you to have the last word. I think that your response in terms of the misconception about Afghanistan that, Afghans really don't want human rights and democracy, it's kind of incompatible with their culture and history, which is ridiculous, obviously. I think that misperception has driven a lot of the attitude toward cutting some of these programs. And of course, there were programs that probably needed to be cut, but the hatchet came out, instead of the scalpel's knife. And so I think, what we knew, we have to pick up the slack, right? So to answer the question about radio and media, that we should all be thinking about ways to get radio media around firewalls and to reach populations. The same thing with social media and the analysis of social media and how social media can be used, but also to get messages and to give people access to just alternative sources of information, but then also for us to understand by paying attention to social media in that country what some of the dynamics are. So I think many of these questions are connected by going back to Grace's question on misperception. But Halima, I want to give you the last word.
Thank you, General McMaster. I think just to add to your point and then to answer the question on the shift in online messaging, I think that we might be at a moment where with funding for diaspora media and restrictions inside the country for Afghan media are narrowing the information kind of pathways for Afghans. Some of the things to think about is our campaigns, and I'm working on a research project where I'm collecting the social media accounts, handles of Taliban followers, Taliban leadership, monitoring their posts. And I think that we can make an appeal for these social media companies to remove some of these or censor some of these accounts online, because these regimes and these individuals are actually censoring content inside the country. And so countering narratives, it's very difficult because the powerful, presence of the Taliban, and then you've got diaspora media trying to counter that narrative. I think there's more that could be done in this valley to advocate for shutting down some of these accounts that are spreading propaganda and misinformation within the Afghan population. They rely on it. There's evidence of it, that the Taliban rely on social media, especially X, to disseminate their propaganda.
Okay, so here at the Hoover Institution, one of our mottos is ideas advancing freedom. I can't think of a panel discussion that's more directly connected to that mission. And please join me in giving these three heroes a round of applause. Thank you.